You're with us here on the Pulse on the JoyNews channel. There are serious concerns now as we speak, even about some terrorist movements along both the northwest and east borders of this country. The concern was raised by President Akufo-Addo this week when he met with some EU leaders here in Accra. It is not the first time, and it's becoming a matter of security concern and also for some security agencies in Ghana.
We here in Ghana are beginning to get an unusual and very unhealthy number of refugees beginning to take place here in Ghana as a result of the occurrence in Burkina Faso, both on our northwest border as well as on our northeast border. A lot of people coming in, and you can be sure that some of them belong to these terrorist groupings. It's not as difficult to be able to maintain complete control of the flow of refugees that are coming, to be able to identify everybody that is coming into your territory. But it is an exercise that we cannot share, and we have to do our best to make sure that we have a strong hand on this. There are many areas of cooperation in this whole anti-terrorist struggle that we are engaged in with the European Union, also various countries. Yes, President Charles Michel was here. I've also had occasion to meet him a couple of times in Brussels, of course at various international fora, and we continue to work. The European Union seems determined to find ways of assisting us here in Ghana to be able to confront this menace. We're already in very significant discussions with Brussels on that, and but so far it looks as if it's very positive.
President Akufo-Addo disclosing that to Benelux countries, Belgium, Netherlands and Luxembourg foreign ministers who engaged President Akufo-Addo a couple of days ago. But how real is the situation, and what steps do we need to take immediately to tackle that challenge? The West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism is asking that security agencies must beef up the boots on the ground and to bring up some interventions that will help resolve the crisis. Joining us now is Mukhtar Mumuni Mukhtar, Executive Director for the Center. Thank you, sir, for always making time to educate us on what's happening as far as this extremist activities is concerned. Last year, you sent or put out a release warning the agencies about a possible infiltration given the porous nature of our borders. It's becoming much more of a reality now.
Sure. Far earlier than that, I think since 2017, 2016, we started monitoring the developments in the sub-region and within the Sahel, and we could tell that there was a movement towards coastal states from the Sahel. And a couple of years after, we began to alert security authorities that this could be a reality here anytime soon at the time if we did not put in measures, especially at the borders, and ensure that we build the resilience against exploitation of vulnerabilities here. And today, here we are. It's no longer just a possibility. It's a reality that we are living and actually suffering the consequences of terrorism in West Africa.
What's really the cause of this infiltration? We know Ghana to be a safe haven for democratic activities. Now that portion of our country, Northwest, is beginning to get threatened. The president alludes to what's happening in neighboring Burkina Faso. Is that entirely what's happening?
Well, what is happening in Burkina Faso is much more than what you just heard. There's a lot more happening within the central part of Burkina Faso, in the northeast and the northern part of Burkina Faso. And we're beginning to see significant drift of this threat towards us, much more closer to us than it has ever been. If you look at the center, eastern, southern part of Burkina Faso, it's very close. The last attack closer to our border was very close to Boku. There's a village called Bitu. Bitu is very close to Boku, then even Bolga is to Boku.
Right.
And several other activities in terms of raids, in terms of attacks on communities that has pushed individuals of Burkinabés into our space here. So the reality is that we are actually in this already. And so we need to do more than we have ever done around this.
Okay. I'll be taking your thoughts on how fertile the grounds are around that region, the northwestern part of our country, and whether or not a lot of the youthful population may be, of course, vulnerable to violent extremism or radicalization. We'll get into that shortly, but let's get onto the grounds and find out what's happening there. Ilyasu Tanko is joining us because we understand terrorists are said to have, of course, turned their attention to the country after a near failure to establish themselves on the Ivorian side as well. Ilyasu, what's the situation now and what can you report? Ilyasu, if you can hear me, I'm asking about the situation in the northeast region. While you do that, kindly unmute for me so I can hear the points you're making.
Well, Blazed, like you said in the intro there, it's been reported that there have been increased terrorist activities along our borders, especially in the northeastern area around the Boko region. There have been, more than 8 attacks since last year in a community called Bitu, which is very close to Boko, and also that particular road from Boko through Kulungugu to the Bitu particular area, we understand has also been infested. And also when you go to the northwestern part of the country, from the Tumu area to the Gulu area, we understand the terrorists have diverted their attention and they are trying to set up a retreat basis, especially in the Sisala district in that particular area. And we do also know that because of that particular situation, there have been influx of Burkinabés into this particular country.
Right. So let's talk about, let's stay on that influx because I'm interested in that story. What's the volume like? How often do we see the influx? Lots of people moving into neighboring Republic of Ghana, as it is in their case.
Or because of how volatile the situation is, and it appears the authorities at the border are not able to control this particular influx. We have an estimated number of 6,000 or more currently in this particular country. We understand that now, because of the deteriorating security situation in Burkina Faso, these people now travel in Kia trucks, and they do so at nighttime, so they could evade security forces along the border. And so we are talking about 6,000 or more refugees, and we still getting indication that many people, especially like I said, because of the increased activity of terrorists in that particular border line, we understand many people are still fleeing their communities and they are crossing into Ghana.
And I recall somewhere last year you reporting about the arrest of one sheikh who's being accused of radicalizing the youth in that part of the country. What's the update on that story, and how's the national security dealing with that for now?
Well, there have been a lot of counter-terrorism arrests in the part of in this part of the country. Before this particular arrest, a number of targeted suspects in Karaga in the Savulugu district and in part of Posiga area were also picked up. But because authorities are not speaking on matters about terrorism, we also do know that there was some arrests also made in Bolga in a particular hotel, and also some arrests connected to terrorism was also made on the Nasia police checkpoint there. So there have been a number of arrests since 2021. We can count up to about over 100 suspects that have been rounded up, not once, by security forces. And because the security are not open up for discussion on this particular matter, we do not know the state of this particular matter. There was a particular instance where we reported about a clash that occurred in a Karaga village, where we understand from local sources that the security were going to this particular village to conduct an activity, and they were fired at. They had to return fire, and one of the suspects was killed and his body taken to Accra. All this has not been discussed by the security forces, but they continue to make much effort with regards to counter-terrorism activity. We also do know that there are several forces that have been deployed along our borders just so to ward these terrorists who are making strenuous efforts, as we are learning, to establish retreat or refuge bases in our territory. And so the security forces are doing their best to ensure that at least they will be able to put them under control.
Elias, let's finally talk about the safety of residents. And how are they feeling now, knowing that on a daily basis there's that risk of some terror attacks that may happen within the community? We've lost Elias Tanko there, but point well made, and that's also a question that we could be putting to you, because I recall that last year you visited some of these communities, the same community he's talking about. Is it what's the name of the place again? The community in Burkina Faso, which is closer to the borders then? B2. Right.
And it's in the eastern northern point of Ghana, very closer to Kulungugu.
Right.
And of course close to Boko as well because of the borderline. So we are very close to the center of action now, between Ghana and...
Is this community an area of, should it be of an interest to our national security agency?
It already is. National security, of course, would have that as as a feature of the interest. And of course, and I hear your reporter talk, in a very professional way, and he talks about the fact that there are a lot of things that the security agencies are not, not discussing and not talking publicly. But the reality is that we are already in this situation. We are already in the theater of issues, and so we need to do more than we are doing in terms of local community and non-state actors. What should we be doing? How do we position ourselves? How should we, act in terms of building resilience against this? And I think that to have a proper conversation around it, you need to situate it in the context of what is a threat to us? Is it a threat from external sources, from Burkina Faso
or from within?
Here? Is that what constitutes the greatest danger in terms of violent extremism? Is it threats within or vulnerabilities within the space that constitute the great danger to us? Is it a combination of the two? And if so, how do we deal with it? And so it's important that we look at this thing.
Yes, but that's where my concern comes up, the issue about cross-fertilization, where you may find, radical elements infiltrating our borders and taking advantage of first of all, the economic situation, getting some youth boots on the ground, and that should start it.
Yes. So what it is that we're having a huge influx of Burkinabés into our space. Earlier this year, we're looking at 1,800. There are several statistics put out by the International Migration Organization for Migration and others. Now we are talking about 4,000 people that have crossed onto this space. And so it is very, very likely that there would be individuals amongst them who were part of these attacks, who had witnessed these attacks, who are vulnerable to, for recruitment by extremist groups. So those are things that should guide how we deal with them. And you just asked the question of how do the citizens or local communities feel. Of course, for a long time, the way we report and discuss this has often been situated in the context of seeing them as a threat. We have securitized, refugees, and so people see them as a threat rather than people who are here and looking for support, looking for, help. And so we need to do more than that by engaging the local community to understand that this is a threat they are fleeing from. We need to deal with them in a manner that builds cohesion amongst us, because it doesn't take long for competition around resources to create its own set of vulnerabilities and security issues.
The opinions are divided as to what's happening northwest of our border. The point about Ghana serving as a launch pad for these extremists to regroup and then launch back into Burkina Faso, and others feeling that this will equally pose a threat to national security. What do you stand in?
So the fact that Ghana has been thought or believed to have been a place for launching attacks or logistics or for restocking and all that, it could be valid, and it is valid. It is also true that it doesn't take forever. It takes just a period of time for the same, place to be used as, a center of violence, a center of attacks. And so it depends on how we respond to the issues, and it depends on what vulnerabilities exist in the space. For significantly, so far, we have seen enough evidence that Ghana has been used as a place for organizing and mobilizing logistics and support, and for restocking and for resting. And that it's still a feature here. But at the same time, we're seeing Ghana that possibly could be used as a place, to launch attacks and all that. And at the same time, we're seeing individuals in this space who have been recruited to join extremist groups. Because it's the fact that many people have joined extremist groups. And there are still many individuals who have links and contacts with extremist groups in this space. So it is not exclusively one, purpose for, Ghana has been used for. It's several, I think. And over time, these things are evolving. Security is quickly evolving. And so we need to be up to date, up to task to ensure that we're ahead of the curve in terms of how it evolves.
Ilyasu raising a very critical point about how the security agencies are approaching this. The whole approach of communication. The government is telling us through the National Security Ministry that if you see something, say something. But they are not telling us what they're seeing.
Okay, so security issues are very delicate issues. So you give information only on a need-to-know basis. And so for that, we see that happen. But at the same time, you need to communicate in a manner that is significant enough to allow local population to know what to do, to be part of the effort to deal with security situations. And at this moment, we need local communities or citizens to be fully aware of what it is that this nation is facing, either from internal or external sources. We need to know what we need to do as citizens in terms of our duties and responsibilities. That part has not been adequate. We need to rope in the role of civil society and create very deliberate, dedicated initiatives that allow civil society to tap into it and educate local populations in terms of how do we position ourselves, how do we deal with it, how do we volunteer information to law enforcement officers, how do we deal with this issue even amongst us to ensure that we build enough resilience against it. Other than that, what we're seeing, it creates room for conjecture, for misinformation and disinformation. That could create a new sort of threat on its own. 2 weeks ago, we had reports that terrorists had come into the Savannah, some space in the Savannah region. We are talking about people, say 500 people come in. Mm-hmm. Eventually, it turned out that there were just 53 people who had come in. And they didn't come in as a group who were coming in to attack or, fleeing from the threat. And so that's the element of misinformation can be very, very dangerous because it can create fear and panic in local populations that can lead to undesirable
Mukhtar, there's the conversation around the porous nature of our borders, a conversation we've not had in a very long while.
The issue of porous borders it has been overflowed. All borders are porous.
Really?
All borders are porous within the space in West Africa. Mm-hmm. If you want to go into Togo, there are too many, routes to use. You want to go to Burkina, same way. You want to go to Cote d'Ivoire, the same way. Mm-hmm. And if you are in any of these countries and you want to go to the neighboring countries, it's the same way. We have porous borders all over the place. And I think we need to go beyond just the element of the porosity of our borders as the source of the vulnerability. We need to go beyond that. You see our presidents and other leaders having conversations around the threat. How are they having these conversations? And what are they seeking to effect? What kind of effect is they seeking to have? We need to talk, we are talking about interagency coordination, intelligence sharing amongst these countries. How much are we working together to ensure that we do not have a spillover? In fact, the Accra Initiative was meant to cure the capacity or the potential of a spillover onto coastal states, which includes Ghana. And so the kind of conversation we have at that level must engender that goodwill and support amongst us to do that. Irrespective of what you have at the borders, we are still going to have those threats and vulnerabilities existing. It depends, our ability to prevent this from spilling over, it depends on the coordination and goodwill between us and amongst us to ensure that we share information, share intelligence early enough to prevent that from happening.
And since you're bringing up the conversation around the Accra Initiative, let's do that before we go.
All right.
The last meeting was here in Accra. Of course, we observed the opening remarks from the president. I mean, goodwill messages from international actors. And yet, the effect is what we need to measure. Is this whole Accra Initiative a West Africa-led solution to our security challenges working?
I like the Accra Initiative because it is a move away, a departure from what we saw in the Sahel. The G5 Sahel forces, MINUSMA, AFRICOM, and huge presence of French, forces, Operation Barkhane. Of course, the French are no more in there. It was huge in terms of the military focus to deal with this threat, and that backfired. We have failed in the Sahel. And so some guys came up with the idea, let's have an initiative to prevent coastal states from suffering the same fate. And instead of focusing on a militarized approach, what we call the kinetic approach, let's look at intelligence coordination, intelligence sharing, international cooperation to ensure that we do not have it spilling over onto the space. And that, I support that 100%. Unfortunately, we are seeing, something different. We're seeing a sort of mimicking of what happened in the Sahel. We're seeing the talk about setting up bases in the northern part of the country. We're talking about people interested in buying hardware and fighter jets and armored vehicles and all that. It creates that tendency to shift away from the original objective for setting up, Accra Initiative. We're talking about an African-led initiative for African solutions. That is great. Unfortunately, when you saw in the summit, what did you see? It was a huge presence of European and foreign presence, not just presence, but support in terms of funding it.
Well, they say they are friends to the initiative.
Of course, we have always been friends.
Yeah.
So when you have that, it actually undermines the goodwill. It undermines the basis for making those, transits and
But some would disagree with you on that. The fact that, first of all, you need resources, you need
So if you don't
technology.
have resources, you don't declare that you don't need resources.
Right.
So I think that we need to be very realistic of the threat we're dealing with. If we had diagnosed that this problem we're dealing with is regional in scope, it is regional in the threat conception, we would have formed these regional blocks and regional initiatives to deal with it 10 years ago, 8 years ago. We didn't do that. And now the problem is all over us. And we're trying to do, things in these small blocks of things. We need to recalibrate in terms of what is the approach. And we all have to be on the same page. As we speak to you, right now, I'm not sure that our neighboring countries are on the same page with us in terms of dealing with the threat.
Really?
I'm not sure that the countries that are around us that are dealing with this threat, they are on the same page with us in terms of how they approach to deal with it.
I agree with you in one breath, because of, for instance, what the president said about the presence of the Wagner Group, somewhere operating closer to our northwest.
I didn't want to say that, but that is
border.
It's part of that. And so the conversation that went on with Anthony Blinken and all that, we all know that it was a miscalculated statement. And of course, we saw the repercussions of it. We had to do damage control and stuff like that. And when I hear the statement now, it sort of brings back those memories. And I think that we have to sanitize conversation when it comes to how we deal with, foreign partners around the issues.
And I was just about asking you if the president should tone down on rhetoric surrounding our closest. It's by far one of the closest countries to our Burkina Faso.
That conversation is important because it seeks to highlight the reality of the issues that we're dealing with. But did it have to come from the president? Could we have had, the director of the Fusion Center, the Minister of National Security, have that conversation? Could we have had the Minister for National Security do the conversation? Their counterterrorism unit. Could we have had that kind of conversation instead of coming from the president? So those things are questions that we need to ask. Otherwise, we create a tendency of escalating a threat that could have been contained at a particular time.
Anyway, this conversation will keep going on and on, but I hope that the Accra initiative works.
Hopefully.
Yeah, that's all we're looking out for. Mukhtar, thank you for spending some time with us. Next off, we're talking about the Pensioner Bondholders Forum. They're backing the news and resolving to drag the Ministry of Finance to Shraj. As to why they're doing that, we'll talk about it as we engage leadership of the group shortly. Please stay with us.